Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyra podcast, where we comically and literally look at comic books. I'm Ryan, also known as Comic Stan. I love comic books, but my co-host loves regular books, so I make him read comic books. And this week, I made him read Fantastic Four, first appearance of Silver Surfer and Galactus, and a bunch of others, which we'll get into. And with me, as always, is my aforementioned fantastic co-host. It's Jamie.
Yo, what's up? How we doing?
It had to be fantastic on this week of all weeks. Imagine if I used a different word.
The audience would have been screaming at you.
If I really went around like, I don't want to call him fantastic. I don't want to inflate his ego.
So I want to get right into it this week.
Let's get right into it.
I'm about to have an opinion that I think you're going to disagree with.
Interesting, because I think I was going to surprise you with my opinion. So let's see how we go on this.
I liked it.
Interesting.
I liked it.
Really interesting.
It was fun.
And if there's any queries or anything, we are doing the 60s original run of Fantastic Four.
This is Golden Age shit, man.
Yep, the original gold. No, actually, technically, I looked up today because I think I've got this wrong, and that's why I've got it. This is technically Silver Age.
Silver Age,
because 40s and 50s are Golden Age.
Right, so this is we're doing Silver Age, Stan Lee writing,
Jack Kirby art.
Some
say the greatest creative duo in comic book history.
And you know what? Fucking slaps. It does. It's good.
I have so many criticisms, but all framed within the caveat of it's from the 60s. It's 60 years old, essentially. It was a different time. The medium was different at the time. So it's caveat that. But I think what we both agreed in one of our rare off-air conversations was... we look at the comic book itself.
They don't need to know
critique it how it is.
It's about to happen. They're already along for the ride.
Well, the only reason I'm saying is because, again, I'm going to be critiquing it a lot.
Right, okay.
But, again, under that caveat. But then afterwards, we'll talk about the grander picture, the 60s, blah, blah, blah. The swinging 60s.
Credits, written by Stan Lee, drawn by Jack Kirby.
So the funny thing about the credits is, did you notice, I don't know if you drew your eye out, I only happened to look at this, the actual credits on the issues in the page. So what's funny about them, I think you'll appreciate this. Everyone, it has a little bit at the bottom, like modern comics do. You know, that's always remained. But it has the list, and normally it's, story, pencil, art, colors, whatever. Yeah. This time, so it's Stanley Jack Kirby with inking by Joe Sinnott and lettering by Artie Simek. And these are most of the issues. I don't think the letter was the same on all of them.
Yeah.
The reason I bring this up is because in the box where it tells you who did what, they change it up a little bit each time, right? They're a little bit of fun. See if you can see the similarities between these, right? So the first one says, incredible story by Stan Lee. Incomparable penciling by Jack Kirby. Invincible inking by Joe Sinnott. Inevitable lettering by Artie Simek.
That's great.
And then the next, these are just some of the ones, right? Story by our leader, Stan Lee.
Nice.
Who wrote that.
Rate that.
Illustrations by our idol, Jack Kirby.
Great.
Inking by our star, Joe Sinnott. Lettering by our letterer.
Great.
And then one more. Stan Lee, writer without peer.
Yeah.
Jack Kirby, penciler of the year. Joe Sinnott, inker most sincere. Artie Simek, how'd he get in?
I didn't notice those, and I wish I had.
Does Stan Lee hate Artie Simek, or did he hate Artie Simek?
Well,
whoever that is, a letterer.
Could it have just been a running joke?
Maybe, but you know what I thought? Why I was attracted to these was I remembered the joke, which I think I've told you before. Someone talking about the Beatles. Like
I can tell you this one. Well, I can tell this story.
I did though, so you tell us this.
Somebody asked John Lennon if he thought Ringo...
Oh no, I've got a different one, but you do yours.
Somebody asked John Lennon if he thought Ringo Starr was the best drummer in the world, and John Lennon looked at him and said, he's not even the best drummer in the Beatles.
See, that's a good one.
Was this the George Harrison one?
I don't know who said it, but it was someone else talking about the Beatles.
Yeah.
And it was a written thing.
Oh, and George is the soul of the Beatles.
McCartney is the face or the head of the Beatles.
John Lennon is the voice of the Beatles.
Yes. And Ringo was the drummer. And that's the vibe I got from these.
Yeah, absolutely.
They tickled me once I realised what was happening.
But Ringo, absolute stalwart. You know,
Yeah.
he was the most dependable one out of the lot.
And the lettering is good in these.
Yeah, well, yeah, the lettering's great.
I just love the kind of like, this guy, and the letterer. Like,
So I think we should start with the art.
starting with the arting. So, got a very interesting thing to start off with the art here, which I'm actually going to be sending you some screenshots, not of the comic, but of some other stuff, which is a kind of interesting topic. So I've always been under the impression that, so any old comics that I or we have read, we've read digitally, and I've always been kind of enamored with the old art designs of Marvel and DC comics, especially Marvel from the 60s. Like, I do really like this art style, right? I think what's important to keep in mind is that this is not how it looked when it was first released.
So because they were printed on yellow paper.
And just in the printing process in general, it just lots of faded color and stuff.
Which is why when you look at digitized copies that are being made from the original plates, they look really bright.
Exactly. Yeah. And this was a misconception of mine, because I was just like, look how vibrant the color. And you know what it was? Even though I'd seen like pictures of like actual comics from the 60s, I was like, well, they're old comics. Like, they faded over time. Like, they haven't been kept in the best condition. That's the reason I'm seeing it open in the first place. Yeah. It's not one that's been kept sealed and
but actually it's because they were being printed on cheap paper stock.
Yeah, that's just how it was, pretty close to how they looked when they were first released. So I thought that was an interesting thing to just caveat everything with like, what we're seeing is not what they saw in the 60s.
What we're seeing is what they wanted us to see.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why they reprinted
at least
it.
What we're seeing, and again, this is something that we have to consider, is that what we're seeing may not be what they intended us to see. Maybe whoever was drawing these things and inking them said, well, I know that bright crimson red that I'm putting down here is going to fade to a nice burgundy once I get the yellow of the paper behind it. So I'm going to use that red knowing it's going to fade. Maybe they wanted them to look that way. It may not have been a limitation. It may have actually been that we are using these sort of hyper distinguished colors and these really striking color palettes because what we actually want is it to fade down to that color. I mean, I can't see why that would be the case, because these were designed to appeal to children in newspaper stands and stuff, weren't they?
I say you're probably correct. I think maybe because even though that was the market, I think art looking good, as you've said before, that is like the biggest appeal when you just pick a thing up from a newspaper stand in the 60s, open up, have a look, and then decide to buy it.
Because my overwhelming sense of the art is that it is incredibly bright and cheerful, but it's pretty.
Yeah, I really like it.
It's astonishingly pretty. Now, there are some choices here that have been retconned over the years, which I think are interesting. The first one, and I want to get into this straight away, is that my experience of Galactus is that he is properly massive, right?
Yeah.
Galactus here is only just taller than the Thing.
I think Galactus...
like, he's only a little bit taller than Reed Richards.
I think Galactus here, rough proportions, I think he's meant to be like 50 feet tall. And that's... I'm adding a bit.
I was seeing it at about 10 feet tall.
In some views. Yeah. I think that it also changed from panel to panel.
It's a bit all over the shop, isn't it, as to how big Galactus is. But overwhelmingly, I found the art super charming. And I honestly think if somebody put out a run of comic books now and used digital art methods to get back to this Silver Age style of comic, but juxtaposed it against a modern, not necessarily big two, but imagine like a kind of gritty Image Comics run that looked like this.
To be honest, someone probably has done that, and we just don't know about it.
If you're listening and you're a bigger comic book nerd than Ryan, and somebody has, can you send it to us? Because I'd like to read it.
I think the reason that they don't is because while I like this aesthetic, I think a lot of people have a similar thing with me where when you see this, you just immediately think of old, maybe even nostalgic for some people, but just like of a previous time.
But imagine if somebody challenged your perception of that, and then the story absolutely fucked.
Yeah, I think it's whether someone wants to take the challenge of it. And I think anyone making a comic book, they're like, I want to make this harder for myself. Like, I don't think people are particularly up for that. But I have sent you another link of just what modern Galactus is kind of more like in terms of shape. Is normally he's just a guy who's bigger than the Earth. Yeah. But this one is especially like, this went around a while ago. Someone made it, and it was like incited a fear of like big. There was the fear of big stuff, the megalophobia, I think. Yeah. But the picture I've sent you can look up Galactus swallowing the Earth. He's basically like a solar system big. Yeah. And like encompassing black darkness and scary looking.
Whereas the only way I can describe the dimensions of Galactus here is it's like the scenes in the early Harry Potter films when the kids are stood in front of Hagrid. That's kind of the size differential.
I was thinking more, when you ever see a picture online, it's like, here's the world's tallest man, and he's compared to a normal person. Yeah. It's like, oh, it's Galactus.
Yeah, this is it. He wasn't overly big, but the art for me was really charming, and I think it tackled some really interesting textures in a really beautiful, crisp way. Notably, the Silver Surfer.
Oh yeah, I really like the look of him.
The way they captured that metallic texture must have looked super cool on that old grainy paper.
Oh yeah.
Like, this comic looks great. Everything jumps out of the page. Proportionally, people are often different sizes.
Yep.
Namely Galactus. But I'll give it a free pass for that because everyone else is right.
Yeah, the Thing was consistently proportioned.
Yeah.
He was always a bit bigger than everyone else, which is what you want with him. Yeah, especially now.
Overwhelmingly expressive.
Yeah.
Considering he's made entirely of rocks.
It's the reason why, if you look at him, they specifically gave him rock eyebrows.
So that he could be expressive.
Because I think Kirby was like, I can't get a facial expression out of him if he ain't got eyebrows. It's like when dogs have eyebrows, and you're like, oh, it's like people. Like,
but no, overwhelmingly, I think everything was really crisp and aesthetically really pleasing here. I can see why comic books got so popular having read this. If this is the quality that Marvel were churning out consistently in the early days, I get it.
I think that this... So we'll talk about it in the second half more, but I think this was kind of revolutionary a bit, specifically Jack Kirby, because he is credited with like revolutionizing comic book art. And I think this is like peak why that happened, like this work.
Jack Kirby still kicking?
No, he died a while ago.
Well, to whoever owns his estate and to his family, congratulations on being birthed by such a wonderful artist.
Yep, and a lot of people agree.
Fabulous.
And I should have mentioned this earlier. I'll do it now in case I forget later. The contention between Stanley and Jack Kirby. There's a whole podcast worth of stuff we can get into for that. So I'm not touching all of that.
Okay.
With regards to this specific title, and I think this was one of the earliest different, he left Marvel about kind of mid-70s,
right?
And I think he had a bit of feeling underappreciated. Stanley,
are we getting into the stuff you expressly said we weren't going to get into?
All I'm going to say is when they were asked,
you wanted structure. It's my turn to get back to the comic.
All right. All I say is when they were asked who invented the Fantastic Four, they were like,
no.
Well, we both did, but one of us more than the other. Like, that's how
was
they both
Stanley
said.
really into it?
Well, they both said that. They both said, well, we both did it, but I did most of the work.
That's right.
Because they both said that. That's when it kind of happened.
Stanley did love a bit of stolen valor, though, didn't he?
Apparently.
Yeah.
Again, it's hard to, in these rooms, how they were working, who created the idea for what in the moment kind of stuff. It's just a lot of people are like, Kirby had a lot of pre-evidence before this to suggest that he was responsible for a lot of this. So, back to the comic as you requested.
As I quite politely requested.
Yes. The art, I think, is great for most part. There are some inconsistencies.
Go for it.
Well, some of the faces of the characters,
either
they look different panel to panel. Sometimes, not all the time, not even most of the time, but sometimes. But what more kind of worried once I know, when you notice something, you can't unnotice it. A lot of people have the same face, specifically Reed and Johnny.
Johnny just has blonder hair.
He just has blonde hair, and Reed doesn't.
But they both have quite generically handsome American men faces from the 1960s.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They both kind of look a bit like, Reed Richards, if you take that little bit of grey away from the side of his head, looks overwhelmingly like John Hamm in Mad Men.
Yeah.
He's a bit Donald Draper.
Which I think was just how the American male character looked back then.
Yes.
With the one variation being sometimes they're blonde. and they're a bit more like happy-go-lucky and fun.
And people are mistrustful of blonde men.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is why Johnny's blonde and Reed Richards has got brown hair.
I think it's probably something to do with a lot of people are blonder when they're younger and then they lose as they get older. So I think it's also like a signifier of youth. Because Johnny, as at one point, is revealed to me to be a teenager at this point. It's like, he looks 30.
And that moment when Reed's carrying him away and the kid's down. And it's like, oh yeah, fuck. He's a child.
Yeah, like the youngest, but they all look the same. So maybe because Sue is like shorter than Johnny.
Yeah.
And they just back then, it was like, of course women will be shorter than a man. What is this? Communist Russia? Like, I think that's how they felt about things like that.
That's a generalization that's still broadly applicable, mate. Like,
yes. But I think we've come a long way in representation. Like,
yes.
Here it's just like, here's the stand. And there is a whole thing about they were meant to be like the all-American family in a way. But, you know, Marvel's first family, which is what they're known as. But back to the art. A lot of scenes with the space with Silver Surfer going through it look amazing.
Yeah, they look great.
That is, I think, the biggest thing that people rave about Jack Kirby. Because after this, he did a lot of cosmic characters, like the Eternals.
When did this come out?
This was 60... Oh, I should get the exact date. I should have had the
Yeah,
exact...
because that's quite important for what I'm about to say. Ryan is surfing the cosmic waves of the World Wide Web now to find me an answer to my question.
Well, Wikipedia. Came out, these ones that we're reading now. So this series started in 61. We're reading stuff from 66.
So that's 3 years before the Americans put a man on the moon. And this is at a point where space photography was in its infancy.
So they didn't know what space actually looked like.
No, and Jack Kirby did a pretty stellar job.
I'd say
see what I did there?
He's pretty stellar, pretty interstellar, but just to build your joke, but louder. But
isn't that the whole podcast?
Yeah. But yeah, he did a lot of great stuff with this, and also like Doctor Strange stuff, like just making like space and magic for how he portrayed it. It was basically one and the same, but it all looked great. It all looked intriguing and like eye catching and wonderful. And yeah, you can especially see it with how little we see, but just these little glimpses of this universe just full of color, and it just looks like cosmic. It feels more cosmic than like if you get NASA's like, here's a photo of space, and it's like mostly black, and you're like, great. Like,
yeah, this is cool.
But this, I wish it looked like Jack Kirby made it look. But yeah, those parts were particularly
I wish
great.
Everything looked the way Jack Kirby made it look. If I could live in Jack Kirby's world for a day, I would.
Oh yeah, it'd be fantastic. It'd be scary. Like falling through a kaleidoscope. The one bit of what you might... did you ever see the Doctor Strange film? Benedict Cumberbatch?
Yeah.
So in that film, there's
all this stuff.
Yes.
Can you caption it with
the hands?
Jamie waves his hands.
he's waving his... I'm doing like the blind...
you can ADR it. So I go, all of this stuff.
He's waving his hands in a certain counterclockwise. Now, he's pushing it clockwise again now. And he's pushing it forward. His palm is out front, like a person stopping someone, but he's moving it around. And now he's giving me the finger. Oh no, he's turned it around on himself. Now he's doing it to himself. He's lost control of his hand. You know, normal stuff. But yes, in that Doctor Strange film, there is a bit that they particularly paid homage to. I'm pretty sure it's Jack Kirby. I might be in trouble if it's not. But there's a cosmic, like, falling through a kaleidoscope kind of aspect of, like, Doctor Strange experiencing magic for the first time kind of stuff. But yeah, cosmic stuff is definitely more Kirby's thing, which I really enjoyed here. The look of all the different characters. And just, I have mentioned before, we're covering from issues 44 to 50, because even though I originally suggested we just do the Galactus trilogy of issues.
I'm only doing I only read the Galactus trilogy.
I read the 4 issues beforehand because it tied into the story. It's a introduction of the Inhumans, and there's a lot of new characters. The only reason I bring up is these characters, they've really worked hard in like the 6 decades since to try and make these character models look like more closer to reality now.
Not like D&D goblins.
No, exactly.
Because that took me a minute. When I first saw the D&D goblins, I was like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yes.
Do you know what they reminded me of? The
D&D goblins?
D&D goblins, firstly. But also, you know the little critters that were people in suits in the Power Rangers TV show?
Yeah, and they always were different, but they moved always the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the woman was like, get the Power Rangers. Yeah. Yeah. I remember.
Do you want to know something fun?
Always. Actually, no, I've changed my mind.
You know the Yellow Ranger?
Yeah, I think I know this, but go on.
So the Pink Ranger has a skirt on. The Yellow Ranger doesn't.
Yeah.
And it's because when they made the Power Rangers, they only actually... When they ported the Power Rangers over to the West, so America, they only re-recorded the bits where they weren't in the suits. All of the other footage is the original. I believe it's Korean footage.
Yeah. Oh, Japanese?
Japanese or Korean, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
So the Yellow Ranger doesn't have a skirt because in the suit is a little Japanese man.
Yes.
And it's a woman in the American show. And I just thought that was really charming.
And then what did the American remake of the show do? They made the Yellow Ranger Asian.
They did make the Yellow Ranger Asian, didn't they?
I think. I'm pretty sure.
One of them was Asian.
I feel like that's the thing that I've seen before. It's like, why did they do that?
I like the Green Ranger who had his own giant kaiju bot.
I'm looking at a picture and the Yellow Ranger is in fact Asian.
Would
you care to guess what race the person is who wears the Black Power Ranger suit?
Are they maybe African American?
It looks like it. It looks like it, yeah.
Does it look? And then I imagine the Red Ranger is a big corn-fed white American man.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Blonde?
No, brunette.
Brunette, of course, brunette. It's America.
And then the Blue Power Ranger is a bloody nerd for some reason. Because why not?
Turn the computer around, I want to say.
I can't turn around. It's all plugged in.
It's all plugged into
stuff. It's all plugged in stuff.
But no, so the art. I overwhelmingly, I enjoyed it. I agree with you. There are moments of jank, but I forgave it that.
Yes.
And I don't want the podcast listeners to think that I am just a total curmudgeon and that I just hate on everything because it's not completely crisp. Because if there is the odd moment of inconsistency, but the art is overall very pretty and very charming, I'm still going to enjoy it. And I did hear.
There was a lot of action panels, stuff happening in panels, like some big action, like someone goes through a wall or someone, flies into a thing and does a thing, whatever. And there's a lot of exposition to be like, this is what's happening right now.
So should we get into that? The
reason in relation to the art is what I was going to say is, I feel like the reason they do that is because the 60s, this art form, this medium of content, whatever you want to call it, still in its infancy, in relative to now, especially. And I think even Jack Kirby, who was really good at this stuff, but especially by his own time, I think even he was like, how do I make this in a single panel?
Yeah.
Like, how do I show this? Like, because when you think about like all the mediums, we'll get into this later, but I just thought like for the time, I think he was trying his best with the tools that he personally had.
Yeah.
There wasn't like now where you can learn how to draw a comic book on the internet. Like he was just like, I don't know, they go through a wall and it's not that clear. I'll have someone point out that they've gone through a wall, Yeah. So that's what I just noticed.
So, story. The broad story here, yes. And I'm doing this of my own accord,
of the Galactus Silver Surfer story,
is that people start shitting themselves because Silver Surfer turns up. As we've mentioned on the podcast before Silver Surfer was in the Fantastic Four.
Wasn't in the Fantastic. He's like friends with the Fantastic Four.
Before he sort of came into the Marvel Universe, he was the Herald of Galactus. And so he would fly around the solar system.
Some would say he surfs through the solar system.
Look, do you want me to do this or not?
I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying other people would say that.
Don't start that bullshit, right?
People are saying.
I am here despite my best judgment.
Oh, every week.
Every week. So the Herald of Galactus comes, and then Galactus shows up. Everyone's very, very concerned that Galactus is going to eat the Earth. And then the Silver Surfer decides that friendship is in fact magic.
Yep.
Makes friends with the humans and wards Galactus away. And the humans and the Fantastic Four get to enjoy their lives anew.
Yeah. I mean, would you like me to give any corrections or should we just leave it at that?
I think we should leave it at that.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, that is the basic story, yes.
Yeah, broad strokes, man. Like, I wasn't...
Broad strokes, yes.
We're still in the non-spoiler part of the podcast, Ryan.
I think you've definitely spoiled it. Hang on, Galactus doesn't eat the Earth? Like, what?
Well, no,
because they're supposed to know.
That would be the end of Marvel. Well, it wouldn't be, would it? Like, the Earth could get eaten and Marvel would continue the next week.
Oh, look, a portal's opened. There's a new Earth. Everything's fine now. Some character comes out of the post-credit scene and goes, I'm this guy and I'm here now. Check out the next film.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I'm a fan of the MCU and I acknowledge that stereotype.
Although you didn't like the last one, did you?
Yeah, it was mid. Captain America, Brave New World. Yeah,
I've not seen it.
Very mid. Oh, you wouldn't bother. They were trying to make her... Someone described it really well because they were trying to recapture the magic of Winter Soldier, which is basically an MCU political thriller.
Yeah.
Is it as good as non-MCU political thrillers? Probably not.
Yeah.
But it was a breath of fresh air for that series even by that time. Yeah. And it was a fun mix of those genres. Someone described Captain America Brave New World as, wow, they made the world's first non-political thriller. Not just a thriller, a political thriller without the politics.
Yeah.
That's basically what they made with that. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Very made, don't recommend it. So, story of Fantastic Four and all this. The over-exposition is the biggest thing of this, right? And it's of the time. Once again, that caveat.
How do you feel about it?
I feel like the basic blocks of the story are... I think the basic blocks of the story, like the actual, like, what happens in the plot, I enjoyed. I basically knew the story already anyway, but I still appreciate, the however.
From the first 3 panels of the first issue, I could tell what the story was going to be.
Exactly, yes. But unfortunately, we cannot move past the fact that it was over-expositional to hell. It was the style at the time. I think this was just intended for kids, and they just wanted to make sure the kids were following the plot.
So, yes, I agree with you. It was very expositional.
Yes.
However, I'm going to defend it.
Okay.
I'm going to defend...
I mean, I've already I'm giving it a pass generally. I'm not going to be like, it was bad. Like, it was the best of the 60s. Like,
I'm going to defend the exposition.
Okay.
Because Stan Lee has a nice turn of phrase here.
I did like the writing, like the actual content of the words.
So Stan Lee has a nice turn of phrase here, right? And so the expositional content charmed me because it wasn't trying to be edgy in the way that modern comics do when they give us a lot of over exposition. It wasn't the old thing that you say is like, oh, everything went bad when this happened and I'm the Batman.
Yeah.
It was expositional, but in a way that it was carrying the story along. And I sometimes feel that the exposition in modern comics is giving us all of this insight into what the characters are thinking that slows it down. But really, this is Stan Lee finding 100 little inventive ways to say, this guy flew through this wall, or this guy punched this thing. And it is camp and it is kitschy. But because Stan Lee had such a nice turn of phrase, I would smirk at them. And I would enjoy them. And there's these little asides where Stan Lee's like, by the way, this thing happened because of this reason, and this is this, Stan. And it's sort of, and I think it's more fun. I like an authorial aside. So there's a thing that Terry Pratchett does occasionally, where he will take you right out of the Discworld by using a simile for something that doesn't exist in the Discworld. So he will be talking about, like, Sam Vimes, the head of the city guard in
Guards.
Oh. But he is in Guards.
Okay.
Yes. He's the main POV character for all of the guard related stories.
Right.
And he'll be talking about like something that's happening that's annoyed Sam Vimes. And he'll say, oh, it's like somebody sitting on a bus with their headphones on really loud so you can hear it. So it pulls you out of it, but you're very much aware that it's Terry talking. It's Mr. Pratchett. We unfortunately...
You're on first aid basis with old Terry?
Oh, man. Do you know what? He is he's the only one of my heroes I regret not having had the chance to meet before he died.
Well, fair enough.
Because he was a delicious man and I will hear nothing said to the contrary. But my point is that authorial asides are fun to me. There's a real charm in the author imposing themselves on the story. And Stan Lee does that very obviously and very purposefully here. And that is different to me when I get over-expositional content from the perspective of a character.
Yeah, I think the authorial asides are kind of few and further in between. Then for me, what I again, saying I didn't like it, like I totally
You're allowed
agree.
not to like it. Get in there.
I
Argue
agree
with me.
There's a big difference between the modern comics where they're trying to be of the modern standards.
Yeah.
And then I think lazily will put in a bit of, oh, I hope I don't get found while I'm sneaking around here. Like, why are you saying that out loud?
Yeah.
Like, prime example. But that is different to this, which is consistently over-expositional by our standards.
I don't know that it's over-expositional, though. It is expositional, but I think it's there for a reason, and they did it for a reason. It was...
and like I said that. Like,
it didn't grate on me. This is the thing. It didn't grate on me. I found it charming because, as I've said, Stan Lee had such a nice turn of phrase. Stan Lee has a fantastic turn of phrase. I didn't realize how articulate he was.
Yeah, for me, trying to just follow the story, I just found a lot of like, oh my God, these, like, prime example here, there was a lot of characters doing something and then another character inferring with precise accuracy what that character's thinking and doing, right?
Yes,
there's
okay.
There's a lot of like, a character suddenly runs off somewhere or flies off. Another character goes, they're probably going to try and do this. And it's like, you definitely didn't have time to communicate that because you would just say, they told me they were going to do this.
Yeah.
So it's that careful, like, I think they're about to do this very complex thing.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would grate. But it didn't grate on me. Weirdly, it didn't grate on me.
It didn't grate on me. It just kind of, again, I just read it as like, this is how it was in the 60s. And it's like, fair enough. And again, I know why it was. They wanted kids to be able to follow it. Kids were the main focus of this.
Yeah.
It's kind of loftier stuff than kids were used to at this time. Like an alien coming down to eat the earth. That's the story here. And in the 60s, that would have been like, pay attention because we're explaining what's happening. He's building a machine that's going to suck the energy out of the earth. Like, no kid in that time is going to be able to infer that from like visuals alone, you know? So they had to be like, Reed at one point is like, he's probably draining the power from the energy from the earth and converting it to sustain himself. And I'm like, I get Reed, you're a genius. Even modern Reed is not like, well, all right, maybe probably is. But like, he's a genius because he has to be the character to deliver that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I get why they did it. Like, I totally support them do it. They have my blessing to have done that back 60 years ago. All I'm saying is now as a modern reader, I'm like, I'm so unused to this that it did grate me a little bit, to use your turn of phrase.
I'm certainly not going to stop reading Kafka and start reading Silver Age comic, but there was something pleasant.
I enjoyed it.
I was turning my brain off for 45 minutes.
I enjoyed it in the same way that, like, if you ever see like a film from like if you ever see like clips or, you know, even today, like when people do like parodies of or whatever, but stuff from like the 60s or pre-60s where it was all over theatrical and always like, how dare you? And like that kind of stuff, like, my lady, like no one spoke in that actually at the time, but it was theater language that they were using for film and television at the time.
Do you know what I would advocate for this?
Sure.
Honestly, sincerely, there is a lot of concern right now about people's phones and what they're doing to their brains.
Yep.
But I acknowledge that when you are bored for 10 minutes and you are in a place that is not your home and you need entertaining, the first thing you're going to do is reach for your phone. I would argue that a lot of people would have better mental health if they just sat for 15 minutes and instead of scrolling fucking TikTok, they read a Silver Age comic. Because you turn your brain off in the same way, but you're not chasing that constant dopamine. You are following a thread for 15 minutes, as opposed to spending that 15 minutes watching potentially 30-second videos and then maybe 1 second of another 40. And actually, if viewed like that, this has a real place for the modern consumer. That it's like, oh, you could just scroll through and follow this thread, turn your brain off for 20 minutes, and actually enjoy a story and some pretty art that's not going to tax you.
I would even say that you don't need to go back to this for that, because we always talk about it. We don't cover them as much on this podcast for obvious reasons. That is kind of most modern superhero comic books are that kind of. Do you remember? Prime example was remember the Blue Beetle one we did?
Yeah,
that was just superhero stuff happening. A story is happening, like characters are quippy, you know, like that's the modern version of this. So that stuff is out there. And I totally agree with you on like, it's better to do that. If you don't want like lofty stuff like we kind of normally gravitate towards, or even like parody stuff or like, you know, weird stuff. We like weird stuff. But if you just wanted like a superhero save the day kind of thing, like if you just wanted that, it's probably why there's so much of that abound.
Yeah,
like Marvel DC are making that in droves even today.
When I first started reading comics, I wasn't reading them for pleasure in my own time.
Yeah.
I had them on the second screen opposite a banking system when I was dealing with people's mortgages. And I was reading them in between phone calls, occasionally during phone calls, if we're being entirely honest with ourselves. And that is the function that they served in my life. They kept my back brain busy enough that I didn't want to throw my computer through a fucking window while I was talking about other people's mortgages. And I would honestly advocate for these vintage comics as being a way to just like enjoyably pass 10 minutes instead of scrolling TikTok. I honestly would. I think they serve a really lovely function, and
I think most people would agree with you, like, as well.
And you don't, because do you know, I mean, I don't know how much interest you have in children's media, but there is a movement right now of parents not putting their kids in front of modern kids TV and putting them in front of kids TV from the sort of 60s to like the early 90s, because it's slower and calmer, and they actually people are finding that their children are having fewer behavioral issues when they cut them off from modern TV and put them onto the older stuff, because it's not being designed as carefully to tap into their dopamine centers. And I think this serves the same function, man. If you are really fucking addicted to your phone, read some Silver Age comics. You can turn your brain off for a bit, and they're fun and they're pretty.
My only qualm to that is I would say just read any comics, like any modern comics. I think if you've got any kind of interest at all, this I would say I'd more recommend for like, do you want to see how different it was back in the 60s?
So
like,
you think of it as a time capsule? Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. And that's kind of the way I'm excusing, again, the exposition and stuff. So I'm like, this is just how it was back then.
And this very much leans into who I am as a person. I don't know if I've ever talked about this on the podcast, but I am an antiquarian. I like old things.
I think it's come up once or twice.
Has it?
Probably,
I don't know. But for that reason alone, it charmed me.
Yeah, it's charming in that regard.
It is really charming, isn't it? And I see where you're coming from now with the exposition coming directly out of the characters' mouths. I was thinking more of the yellow text boxes, which are the authorial inserts.
Yeah, and there was a lot less of that than I anticipated. I thought there was going to be
still quite rich with it.
I think there was more mix of dialogue and thought bubbles. And tell you what as well, there was a couple of scenes in some, I think this is from the Inhuman stuff that I read beforehand, the issues that take place before these ones, but it must have happened in the Galactus story. But there are a few moments where a character is thinking in thought bubbles, some exposition, and I'm like, fair enough, like that's what you're doing, cool. But then they switch between thought bubbles and speech bubbles by themselves, and I'm like, why are you making extra work for yourselves? Like, just keep it one or the other. Like, it doesn't matter. But there was literally like a panel where Johnny was doing something, and he just goes like, he's talking what he's doing, like, I'm gonna get in the car and get out of here and go hang out with someone else and see if they're free, whatever. Like, he's explaining what he's doing as he's doing it. But it literally goes, thought bubble, speech bubble, thought bubble. It's like, why?
Because he's thinking before he's speaking, Ryan. Maybe if we did more...
by himself. I want to prime my words before I hear them.
Yeah, fair enough. Before I hear them a second time.
Yeah, and again, that's the kind of criticism where it's that quaint criticism of like, oh, you're doing it like that back then, you know. But yeah, I think more in terms of the actual story itself, I did find it entertaining. There was a lot, like, I knew the basic box of the story, but I didn't. There was a couple bits I found really interesting that I had no idea happened. Prime example, I've said prime example a lot. That might become like my catchphrase.
It's one of your favorite. If you listen back to old episodes, it's one of your verbal tics.
Yeah, it is a prime example of me saying
What's
prime
mine?
example.
What are my verbal tics?
I'll try. You would think I know because I edit the podcast, but I think I talk about turning your brain off when you're doing something. I think that's me when I'm editing. Or
what
whoever.
do you watch when you're editing?
I have to watch this. I can't focus on anything else.
Really?
Yeah,
so you just have to listen to us talking?
Yeah, but time flies by when I do it.
And you edit like 2-speed, don't you?
Yes, exactly, yeah. But the one bit where I thought was really cool was the reason people start panicking in the first place is because the sky turns into fire. And I had no idea that happened. I was like, what is this?
What was really fun is the sky turns into fire. Johnny then turns into fire to go and investigate. And somebody puts him out because they're like, oh, there's the fireman clearly made the sky turn into fire.
And tell you what, early indications of Stan Lee doing he might have already done it by this time, but him creating the X-Men as like a response to racism, but him using powers instead of the fear of powers instead of the fear of a class of people or culture.
Yeah.
And as kind of that of like, like that bad thing is happening. We don't like you. You're probably connected. And all right, man on fire, sky on fire. closer connection, I will give you that. But I thought that was like a little early indication of like what he was doing at the time.
Because when did he start the X-Men? Like 70s?
About the 60s as well, but they didn't take off until like the late 70s, 80s. He was doing them for a while. Well, I don't know if he specifically was doing them for a while, but the version he made, which was like the original 5 and Professor X, they were not popular at all.
And Logan wasn't one of he was the second generation.
It was when Logan came in the second generation, written by other people, that they started to pick up. I think it was Chris Claremont who kind of picked one from them, but Sky on Fire, and I thought, this is the early Galactus stuff, or like Silver Surfer is doing this stuff, because I've seen iterations of this story.
No, it was the Watcher.
It was the Watcher, and right here's where we get into some proper criticisms that I think are criticisms that are only excused by, well, it's for kids, so who cares? I think that's the only kind of thing. The Watcher is a character who I've always known to be the guy who a race of highly intelligent beings who are literally watch and record the significant events of the cosmos, right?
And he fully gets involved here.
And that's part of the story. His whole thing is, I took an oath to stand and watch only, but I cannot abide Galactus eating this planet of sentient beings who I have grown accustomed to. Yeah. So I will step in ever so slightly to veer the course of direction of it. And that's the story I've always known as. And I like that. I like the idea of a character who's defined by inaction and then is forced to take action because they care. How does he take action first? Light the entire sky on fire. Like, what are you doing?
Also, I'm going to reference that film Her with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson's voice.
Yep.
Where he asks her how many relationships similar to his that she's in. She's like, 72. You have to remember, I am infinite. And so my experience of time is that I wait for an infinite period between every time you speak to me. So I have multiple of these conversations going on. That Watcher, they're infinite beings, right?
I don't know if
Are they immortal?
I think they're immortal. I don't think they're not omnipresent.
No, but they're immortal, right?
Yes.
So the amount of time that he's been watching the humans on Earth is like 5 minutes in his time. You know?
I don't know if this might have been retconned, who knows. I don't know if he just appears for the most significant things or if he's always watching. Like
You'd think somebody called the Watcher would always be watching.
You would think, living up to the name.
Well, you'd hope so, wouldn't you? If not, what are you doing? If you're spending less of your time watching than doing other things, why are you called the Watcher?
Yeah, so what are you doing right now? Nothing really. Are you not watching anything? Nah, I don't really feel like it. You're the Watcher! Like, it's in the name.
Yeah, Breaking Bad's on.
I'm not doing something else.
I'm actually listening to the Comic Literate podcast.
Well, that's listening. So unless you're watching the YouTube channel where it's just a thumbnail I put up there for getting on there. But whatever. So he sets the sky on fire, and then credence to what you were saying, he's like, I didn't realize they would pan. I only put up to deter the Silver Surfer.
I've watched the entire development of your species, and I didn't think that the sky being on fire would cause utter pandemonium.
Because it's never happened. Like, how was I supposed to know that's how people would react? And then he's like, all right, I'll fix it.
I'll turn the sky fire off.
Yeah, turn the sky fire off. It's now grey space debris. Like, that's a little more calming. It's like, yeah, technically correct. I
don't know that it is technically correct, Ryan.
It's more calming than fire. Like, of the scale of things.
It's the solution that Jack Kirby decided he could draw. I think if the sky was on fire and then it turned to grey space dust, I would continue to be concerned.
Yeah, but at least you'd be like, well, the fire's out. It's not actively burning now. Like, that's something.
Fire's out. I mean, in fairness, where there is a fire in a place that you don't want there to be a fire, the fire being out is generally considered to be positive.
It's better than still being active, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
In the comparison of situations you could be in, at least if there was fire and there's no longer fire, that's better than if there still was fire.
I remember
what great argument we're having.
There was a big fire, like downwind of me. Is that what you call it? Where the wind is blowing from the fire towards where you live?
Downwind. Yeah, you're downwind.
I was downwind of a big factory fire recently. You also live in Norwich. You live a little bit further away from it than me. But do you remember the one?
Yes, I think.
The old factory.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Can you bleep out me saying my postcode?
Yeah, I will now, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
I didn't even think of that, but yes.
I didn't say my full postcode, but I said enough.
And your national insurance number? Go on.
You can have my bank account number and sort code if you want.
No, don't do that, because Jeremy Clarkson did a thing like that where he's like, who cares if you've got it? Here's mine. And then someone managed to set up a direct debit before I take money from him. So it's like, oh, I'll prove wrong then.
That's so good. He's got less money now that he bought a fucking farm.
Yes. So you were downwind from a factory fire.
And
back to the factory fire.
Thank you. I was walking somewhere and I stopped to say hello to some of the firemen who were like watering up and buying cornettos from the corner shop. Genuinely, they were in all their gear covered in soot buying cornettos. I was like, how are you getting on with the fire, lads? They were like, pretty good. We're just, we should have it out by the morning. I was like, oh, great job. Well done. Thank you for protecting my community from fire. That kind of conversation. How much asbestos is in that building? And they were like, oh God, so much. And I was like, being downwind of the fire bad then? They were like, oh, so bad. And it's like the fire's nearly out, but the grey cloud of asbestos that has been unsettled by it may kill us all yet. And
again, supporting my point, the fire was almost out and they were very calm about it. It wasn't even fully out and they were like, we're good.
It was a big fire.
It's close enough.
It was a big fire, right? And it happened not all that long after somebody found out they couldn't develop on it. And it's like, oh, I wonder why it suddenly caught fire.
Always happens like that, doesn't it? Crazy.
Funny that, isn't it?
Speaking of bloody contrivances, right? Yeah. The amount of contrivances in this.
Oh, it's rife with them.
What are the odds that, I read the 4 issues beforehand with the Inhumans.
Yeah.
There was a bunch in that. I won't bother getting into those. But again, my old catchphrase, there's a prime example of it here. Silver Surfer, the Thing punches Silver Surfer after he signaled to Galactus. So he's like, right, job's done. I can be punched off a building now. It doesn't matter. So he gets punched off a building by the Thing. And he just happens to fall into the studio of the Thing's girlfriend, Alicia. I can't remember. Masters, I think. But anyway, they're not even...
chick.
Yeah, yes. And they're not there because her studio is there. They just tracked the Silver Surfer to a random... building top, and then it's like, oh, the studio he just happened to fall into. Oh, he's learning the magic of humanity and friendship from this woman and stuff. That was just a big contrivance. I think Stanley was like it doesn't. No one's going to question it. Not the people who read this aren't going to question it.
The real question is that the Thing has a blind girlfriend, right?
Yes,
presumably because he's worried about his appearance.
Yes,
you think she'd notice with her other senses?
She knows. It's not that she doesn't. It's not that he's keeping a secret from her or anything.
Well, that's what I thought. That was what I thought was the implication, and I was like, surely she'd notice.
No, she knows what he is and everything. The message of it is more meant to be like, yes, he looks like a monster, but because she doesn't see the monster, she loves the man within. Like, she loves him for who he is.
And the fact that even flaccid, he is still firm.
Well, he's always erect, obviously.
Well, how could he not be?
Have you seen Mallrats?
Yeah, of course I've seen Mallrats.
You know what I'm referencing, yeah. So, look up Mallrats Hulk Dick or Thing Dick. It's one of the two. It's one of those guys. But
I think it's Hulk Dick.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about that is of this time, like the whole, and this is, to be fair, this is what I did enjoy a little bit of, was the Thing and his kind of inner turmoil for being who he is.
Definitely at the end when she's like buddied up with Silver Surfer and he's like, oh, there's a beautiful, slick steel man here. Why is she going to love a horrible thing like me?
Yeah. And I think that was new for the time, which we'll get into more of. But I think what I did like that you were hearing this inner turmoil and stuff, and that made it more of a, 3-dimensional character, 4-dimensional, I don't know. But
3-dimensional.
3-dimensional. But I did really like the Thing. I thought for everyone else talking like these kind of over theatrical, like, look, we have to save the day kind of thing.
He has a really heavy accent, doesn't he?
He's a proper New Yorker.
Yeah.
He's always talking like, down on Yancey Street, we saw this with our fists kind of thing. Like, he's kind of like, what do you mean? He's like, W-A-D-D.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
He almost sounds like a self-insert character from Stan Lee.
Yeah, probably is. Yeah, Stanley loves the Thing. Like, I think he's like his proudest character potentially.
So, because Stan Lee had quite a pronounced New York accent, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah, less. I would probably more. I speculate more that he based the Thing on people he knew from New York.
Yeah,
kind of still can be a little self-insert, but yeah, Stanley was more like Excelsior, like. Greetings, true believers.
He was an odd dude, wasn't he?
Yeah, of course. I mean, he had to be to do all this.
Yeah, but I suppose a well-grounded, quite normal person doesn't think up the Thing.
Yeah, but I think he probably based the Thing more on like the blue-collar construction workers. That, I mean, New York's always ever and ever, it's always been under construction. It's never not been under construction.
Yeah.
So it probably based on that kind of like hey, Tony, we gotta get out of here. We gotta
go to Queens and mix some concrete.
I'm walking here, but with the thing, you'd be a bit more gruffly. You'd be like, what do you mean? She ain't never gonna love an old stone face like me.
What, do we think the thing might have a gravelly voice, Ryan? Is that the expectation?
I think it's been well established that he does for exactly the reason you said that.
Because his vocal cords are actually made of gravel.
Probably gravel, yes.
I wonder how the thing's vocal cords would work.
Well, a lot of stuff he does just sound normal. I mean, in the early 2000s Fantastic Four is Michael Chiklis. He did give it a bit kind of like a and then a lot of stuff he's a bit more New Yorker, like what are you doing? The latest one actually has him with just a normal voice, which I think is better. I think it's a fun juxtaposition of him looking weird and just sounding normal.
But how would his vocal cords work?
We're not getting into this because
I think we should. This is the kind of shit that comic book nerds care about.
We do not know nearly enough about actual vocal cords to then hypothesize what
I know how vocal cords work.
I'll tell you this, right? Thing about the thing is, it's been
thing about the
thing. A lot of comics have confirmed is just the outer layer that's rock.
Well, so he's got pink lungs inside.
Yeah, he is completely normal in quotation marks, human on the inside. It's a rocky exterior that he has, and like his overall shape has changed to accommodate the extra rock.
He has a tough exterior, but he's really soft on the inside.
Soft on the inside, heart of gold. Yeah,
he is.
And that's why he's one of the best Marvel characters ever, and it's good to see he has talked like this for 60 years. Like he still talks like this. He's one of the most prominent Jewish characters in Marvel Comics.
Oh, is
probably
he Jewish?
Superhero Comics. Yeah. How did you find this is your first experience of Clobbering Time? How'd you like that? It's so fun.
Fun.
Every time it happened, I smiled when I read it.
Yeah, totally.
Love a good Clobbering Time. I think it's one of those things that was, even at the time it came out, probably quite a bit cheesy, like a bit like it's a superhero catchphrase on its surface. Like it's not even a particularly great one, but I think it's endured because of the character.
Yeah.
It's the character making the phrase, not the other way around.
And like there are some old comic book phrases that have endured, like the sound of Spider-Man's webs.
Yeah, but like a saying.
And Spidey senses.
Yeah, my Spidey sense. Well, he doesn't say that anymore. He doesn't say Spidey sense is tingling.
It's the tingle,
Yeah, but the thing still says Clobbering Time because it's timeless.
It's always Clobbering Time.
One of the best versions of it I've ever seen, iterations. There was a comic where they were going through different universe, like multiverses stuff, and they go through one, and it's a very prim and proper, posh universe.
Yeah,
and they see themselves, and the Thing is in a suit with a monocle and a top hat. And I can't remember what the context that he says it in here, but basically he goes, "'Tis the clobbering hour, m'lady."
M'lady.
He was wearing a monocle. It's fine.
So is that the barrier for entry for being able to say m'lady?
Yeah, if you're wearing an entire tux and a monocle, I think that's more than if you're just a neckbeard wearing a trilby. You know?
Oh, fucking the neckbeards have ruined trilby hats.
Yeah, but if you're wearing an entire suit, like that's better than if you're just wearing a big oversized shirt with a koi or a samurai on it. You know, like.
And a silk dressing gown.
Yes. Or a kimono.
Well, that's, a kimono being a silk dressing gown.
I mean, I think a kimono is a very specific thing. Is a kimono a silk dressing gown, but not all silk dressing gowns are kimonos?
No, because a kimono is a very specific piece of, a very specific garment.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but you wouldn't see like a neckbeard in an actual kimono.
You don't, they might.
If you are a neckbeard, I imagine we have a few neckbeards that listen.
The kind of thing they would spend money on.
So
more than deodorant.
Well, yeah. I would imagine that among our listeners, there are some trilby hat wearing neckbeards. If you're one of them, don't be offended.
As long as you're nice to people, like, be proud of that status.
But if you are a neck-bearded, trilby hat wearing incel who likes our podcast,
I mean, incel goes beyond. You're definitely not nice to people if you're an incel.
And you do own an actual traditional kimono, can you send a photograph of you in your kimono to
holding a samurai sword,
holding a katana?
Yep.
Or
nunchucks. I'll accept nunchucks.
I would also accept nunchucks or a bow staff.
Yeah.
Just any kind of like Okinawan or Japanese farming implement come weapon.
Yes, and send it in with your date of birth and social security number or something.
And a photograph of your body pillow, but only from the waist up, because that's fucking gross, guy.
Don't show us this. Don't show us the torn seam of the bomb.
And
hey, on that
the
note,
Ziploc bag of lentil soup.
back to the comic, if ever there was.
If ever there was a moment to go back to the comic.
Yeah.
So we liked the Thing.
Yeah.
We liked Johnny.
Yeah, Johnny was fun.
Johnny.
Again, big contrivance of the Watcher. I was getting on this earlier.
Yeah, sorry.
His whole thing, like he does it so often.
Yeah.
He's like, I cannot possibly interfere at all. The sky on fire was me, but I've turned it into debris now. So that's the last of my.
Turned it into debris.
That's the last of my interfering. I cannot possibly do anymore. He's like the person who's like, oh, I'm gonna die. I couldn't possibly have a. Well, I'll take a big slice, obviously. Like I'll have a second slice. He's like that, but with interfering in human history. But then it gets to the point. It's like, oh, my earlier attempts have failed. And he's talking to the Human Torch, and he's like, there's something we could go get. And Human's just like, all right, go get it then. And he's like, I couldn't possibly interfere. It's like, for
not
fuck's
again.
sake. Like every time it's like, well, there's you set the sky on fire and now you draw the line.
Brother in Christ.
Did you use credit? Do you have credit? It's like, this is the amount of interference you can do.
Before the board.
Them all on setting the sky on fire. And now you can't do anything else. And even then, when he's like, I can't interfere anymore, you'll have to go get it. And I'm like, okay.
He sends poor Johnny into space.
But I'm like, that in itself is a concept, like, fair enough. Like, he did stuff earlier. Maybe even now it's like, oh, I did that stuff earlier. I can't do anything now.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, fine. I like that. Then he's like, let me just open up this portal here for you and I'll tell you exactly where to go. It's like, my brother in Christ, you are interfering. You might as well just get the fucking thing yourself.
Yeah,
like,
they said poor Johnny. He's only a child.
It's gotten to the point where it's like, I couldn't possibly. You'll have to do it. I can't do it. I'll just give you the means to get there and the directions to go, and I'll be in your head as you're going to guide you, and I'll show you what it is. Like, just get it yourself.
How does that not count as interfering, you fuckwit?
Exactly. You're not the watcher, you're the doer now.
It's even worse, because if it actually interfered, he wouldn't have risked Johnny's life.
Yeah. And also, when Johnny comes back and he's like, I did like this little bit, I think you will as well, he had that cosmic, this relative insignificance to the larger universe feeling, and even the Watcher's like, he can't process it, so he's literally like not remember it, like his mind can't hold on to what he saw, so that's why he has this feeling that he can't articulate, because he can't even remember what he saw that made him feel the way he felt. Like, I liked all that stuff. But it's like he nearly potentially went insane from what he saw and where he went to get this device. And the Watcher's like, yeah, I couldn't possibly have gone, but luckily he almost went insane and survived, luckily, so it's fine now.
And it's like, oh yeah, that's just actually a Tuesday for me. I could have just
exist like that.
It would have been the equivalent of him sending Johnny for a pack of smokes.
Yeah. But through like a horror, like a house of horrors, but instead of like witches and demons, it's existential dread and bloody Lovecraftian,
a
like
profound feeling of your own insignificance in the universe.
Yes, exactly. Which is what Galactus really should be, and has been changed too in more recent comics. Here, he was just a tall dude.
I like this version of Galactus.
I like that this is where he started.
He's just a guy.
I'll tell you one thing I noticed.
He's just a guy.
He's just a tall guy.
He's just a guy who's hungry for planet.
And you just happen to have a tasty looking planet that you shouldn't be flaunting that planet with all its resources like you've been doing. It was inevitable that something was going to come along.
Ryan, that is a questionable opinion you've got there.
I'm doing the bad faith version of a Galactus supporter who victim blames the Earth, basically.
If Galactus had like a MAGA style following, what would they have on the hats?
The things coming out of his head.
What, they would wear those giant...
They would be sticking out. They would be baseball caps with the purple things coming out of the top.
It'd be a big rally of people in the giant...
The Galactus antlers.
The Galactus antlers.
The Galactulant.
I'm going to let you get to it yourself.
Galantlers?
Galantlers.
Yeah.
Galantlers.
Yeah. They'd have the Galantlers.
From now on, they're called Galantlers.
Yeah, if we remember, which we probably won't.
Galactus doesn't have the Galantlers anymore.
Yeah, he has still got them.
Has he?
Yeah, of course he has.
I mean, in that last one I saw, he was a giant, like, you know the totem heads that you see?
Yeah, that was so that was like a concept kind of thing. Like he's now just he's a proportioned guy, but he's as big enough that he could feasibly eat a planet. Like he's that size now.
Whereas now he just has to drain them, which I think is weirder.
I mean, he gets the energy out or something. There is an interesting thing where they kind of retconned why he looks like a person, and they never really bother with other kind of cosmic. Like the Watcher looks like a person. They never bother explaining that.
Bunny-shaped head, though.
Yes, yeah. There's for all the watching. But with Galactus...
But he doesn't do that much watching, Ryan.
No, he does.
He does a lot of interfering.
He doesn't do enough watching. That's the problem. That's his problem.
If he did a bit more watching and a little less dicking about...
Yeah, a little less doing anything. Meant to just be watching. But the retcon with Galactus is that they've said Galactus isn't actually a giant dude. He's a force of nature, but he has a thing where the race of people that see him as themselves. Because it's the only way they could interpret what he is, if that makes sense.
Why does it matter how they interpret what he is? Because he's about to eat their fucking planet anyway.
It's not like it's not something he does by choice. It's that he's like this force of the universe, but because he's also a sentient being, it's just like the connection that people have with seeing him. Like,
I think that's some pretty loosey-goosey shit, mate. I'd rather he was just a guy.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue he's a guy because the actual Galactus origins, I think, are pretty fascinating.
Go on, then.
So what happened was...
What happened was, boy?
Before the universe... literally.
Before the universe.
So what happens in the Marvel universe is the universe is on a cycle where it's the Big Bang theory where it Big Bangs out and then it contracts in and then it literally like sucks in and destroys and then that's another bang and that starts the next universe. Yeah. So it's a cycle like that. He is a scientist from the previous universe who had built a ship to try and escape the collapse of the previous universe.
Right.
But in trying to escape it, while he didn't die like everyone else in his universe, he became inadvertently a part of the new universe. Yeah. And that's why he's literally a cosmic being that he's not good or evil. He's not even like a being you can reason with. He is just a force of the universe, like gravity. He's meant to be like on the same terms of gravity.
And I really like, because they do stick quite firm to that here. There's the moments where
the Watcher's like, he's not good or evil. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the exact part I was referencing, yeah. Where the Watcher sort of says he's not good or evil and he is simply a force of nature. And it's quite a nice allegory for nature and the way that the natural world sort of interacts with the Anthropocene.
Yeah.
Where the things that we create will inevitably return to nature eventually. Like everything human is destined to not be anymore at a certain point in its life cycle.
And even though he's meant to be this natural force, he's also like, when he gets thwarted, his plan, he's like, I'm not angry about it because I can't be angry because I'm force of nature. But I'm pissed to the Silver Surfer.
Well,
he's like, I'm not even angry.
He even says to the Silver Surfer, I'm not angry with you, but also actions have repercussions. You do need to do a die.
That sounds like someone who's angry, but trying to hide it. They're trying to act not gotten to, you know? It's like when people argue on the internet, it's like, you sound pretty gotten to there, actually. And then you've lost, despite whatever argument you've lost because you're the one who's gotten to by everything. Yeah. He was kind of like, I'm not even bothered, actually. I don't even care that I've lost. Like, I don't care. But also, fuck this guy. Fuck the Silver Surfer. That's why I read it.
Fuck this guy.
Yeah. I like the ending because, I know this ending. They didn't even really mention the device. I was surprised that. The thing he's actually got is the Ultimate Nullifier. Yeah. It's called the Ultimate Nullifier. And I don't think they actually gave it the name here. Or I didn't notice it. It was sparsely mentioned.
I just thought, I wasn't aware of what it was.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, a MacGuffin was retrieved.
I think they just referred to it as a destructive weapon or like a weapon of mass destruction, essentially. But they were like, it's a thing that could wipe out the universe, the solar system in a second, basically. Yeah. And I did like the Galactus, like, you're just insects or whatever. And Reed's like, well, I've got this thing that'll kill us all, and will you survive as well? Galactus like turns to the Watcher like, you've given this anti-nuke, like basically, like, and the Watcher's like, well, yeah, but you know. What are you going to do about it? Like, I guess I'll leave then.
I didn't actually interfere. I just opened a magic portal so that the humans could retrieve it for themselves.
And I gave them a map to where it is. And I stopped the guy going insane who was retrieving it by being in his head, but I didn't do anything.
I didn't do anything. I don't know what you're on about.
That's the ultimate, like, political, like, was it lack of culpability?
Yeah.
Or, you know, a lack of accountability. It's like, I didn't do anything, so I can't
just
be blamed.
set a series of events into motion that allowed it to happen.
After the turning the sky on fire didn't work.
I love that his first response was to turn the sky on fire. It's so silly.
I love that he was like, oh, bloody, everyone's getting really scared about this sky on fire stuff. Like, it's pretty normal where I'm from.
I've just changed the fundamental paradigm in this lesser species world, and they're freaking out. Fuck knows why.
Yeah. So, last of the bits I was going to mention in the story is...
Little bits.
Is, well, it's not even a little bit, really. It's just how Reed treats Sue Storm, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
Sue Storm's portrayal in this is basically the kind of like, are you okay? And Reed's like, stop being a wife.
Yeah.
Like a derogatory term. Like,
Yeah.
And again, it's of the time and blah, blah, blah. Like, it still sucks to read now.
I'm going to be honest with you. Yeah, I agree with you. That was the one bit that I didn't enjoy.
Yeah.
And it kind of to be honest with you, I don't particularly like Reed Richards. I'm hoping
You've only met the worst Reed Richards, to be fair.
I'm hoping, what's his name? Pedro Pascal.
I was so, you really stuck me there with Pablo, because I was like, have I got it wrong?
Pedro Pascal.
Yes.
Because I like him. He's cool.
Yeah, the thing with Reed is, like, they kind of started on the right path here. With, like, the thing about Reed as a character is he is the most intelligent man on the planet.
Well, if he doesn't treat his wife with respect, I'd argue he isn't.
So the way they've kind of changed over the years to, you know, be more in line with modern, you know, sensibilities and stuff, is at his worst, like this Reed at his worst, he becomes detached. He doesn't give like that kind of like leave me alone or whatever. Like he's always like appreciative of Sue. There's a lot of moments in like modern comics where it kind of happens where Sue's like, hey Reed, you've been in your lab for like a week, like what's going on or whatever. It's like, oh sorry Sue, like I didn't realize where the time had gone, kind of thing. Like he's detached in that way, and Sue has to be the one to come and be like, I know you're working on important stuff, but like come out here, like don't, you know,
come have a cup of tea and see the kids.
Yeah, but the difference as well is that modern Sue Storm is she's smart enough to understand Reed.
Yeah,
which in like even in Marvel Universe standard, she's a really smart person. Like to be on his level to even just understand what he's talking about.
Yes.
You have to be one of the smartest people in the world to understand Reed Richards. So she's on that kind of level. Her powers in the modern comics are way more overpowered than everyone else. She's the most powerful Fantastic Four.
Really?
Yeah. She can create these force fields out of nothing. So you imagine that to like obviously bigger things like big force fields around like entire cities and stuff, but also she can give people like aneurysms and stuff. She's stuff
hardcore.
Like that. She can change her appearance because she controls the light that passes through. She can change her hair color just on a whim. Like I know that's not much in itself, but if you can do that,
the implications
you can do
of that,
a lot of stuff. Yeah, she's worked for S.H.I.E.L.D. as like a kind of secret agent because of her invisibility powers and stuff. And in the 4 issues I read before this Galactus one, at one point, because Reed's ignoring her, she changes her hairstyle and then becomes invisible. And everyone goes, Sue, where are you? Where are you? Like, we're in a dangerous environment. Like, what's happened? Has she been taken away? And while she's invisible, she's like, no, I just wanted to get your attention.
Oh,
so
God.
I unveil my new hairdo.
Does that actually happen?
Yes, that happened in the issues before this.
And Reed doesn't care, right?
Reed is like, you wasted our time and you gave me a heart attack. How dare you? Which, by those standards,
that's fair.
He was probably really progressive.
That's reasonable.
He's really progressive that he was just like, I'm really upset with what you did. I'm not going to do anything else.
Because you made me worry unnecessarily about your well-being.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, modern Sue Storm is way, but she is like still that kind of matriarchal glue that holds them together.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of thing. It's like, she is the most well-adjusted. Like, she really is like one of the most important people in the world, because who else could hang with the Fantastic Four, not just on a powers level, but just on a going through everything that they go through kind of thing. So yeah, she's come a long way from this version of her.
I didn't dislike her in the comics. I disliked Reed Richards quite strongly.
I think she was portrayed as just a warrior. Like,
I assumed the whole thing was that he was a bit of a knob. I genuinely thought that was his shtick.
Yeah, but he's harsher in this than he is in the. They've tweaked him as the years have gone on, the decades gone on. So he's not outwardly harsh. He's not like, leave me alone. In fact, the one thing is, one of the famous Fantastic Four stories is one of their antagonists is the Council of Reeds, which are a bunch of Reeds from alternate dimensions who are all worse than him. Like,
he's the nicest one out of the lot. He's the
nicest one. All of the other ones are just absolute arseholes. And of course, prime example. Fucking hell, I've got to stop saying that.
Have you only just noticed that you do
it? This much has come a lot. It's come up quite a bit in this episode, or I've noticed it more, either way. But an example of it is the Maker, who in the Ultimate Universe, like, he's probably the worst of the Reeds, but you can see where someone who's that smart and feels so alienated from the rest of the world can veer into the side of evil dictator kind of character. So yeah, I thought it was interesting that seeing where they started with, he seems to be relevant to the time in the decade. But yeah, so bigger picture stuff with the 60s comics.
Yeah,
I thought one thing was interesting to know when we're talking about why this was the way it was.
Yeah.
We had this conversation quite a bit with Daredevil Born Again. We were like, this is the best comic this is probably one of the best comics that came out during the 80s.
Is this one of the best of the 60s?
This is definitely one of the best in the 60s. It's one of the reason why it's one of the remembered ones from the 60s.
Yeah.
Apparently it came about because Marvel, who weren't even, I think, Marvel at this time. No, they definitely were Marvel because it's on the front
cover.
Yeah,
because that happened in the 1940s, didn't it?
They only recently just turned into Marvel.
Yeah.
But Marvel at the time, they were looking at Justice League comic numbers, which are doing really well with DC, and some head guy, because Stanley was only editor-in-chief at this time. He wasn't like the owner of the company or anything. And his bosses were like, give us a team. Like, we need a team to comic. Like, that's all we want. It's just a team of superheroes. That's all we need.
And did this happen before the Avengers or afterwards?
Probably before, I'd say. Because no, they would have been like, well, we've got a team, or we need a better team. But I think this happened before. Because they had to unthaw Captain America out. So, yeah, so it'd definitely been like the 60s by that point. So Stanley made a team. What he says and how much he credits with blah, 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 whatever. What he says the driving force behind these characters were, he wanted to revolutionize and do things differently by having characters that were more realistic than the ones that were being made at the time. So in the 40s and 50s, apparently the comics before this time were much more boring or stereotypical hero characters where they were just always like, never mind, I'm here to save the day and everything's great and
to go verily.
Yeah, like they were, and even like the kind of classical American kind of like, oh no, they've done a thing, like I'm here to help and save the day and I'll rescue the dams or whatever.
That all-American stoic ideal.
Yeah. Prime example here. God damn it.
Have you only just noticed that you do this?
So often, it's crazy. I've got a mental block from noticing it. But one of the aspects, which is a prime example of it here, is apparently what's very different from these characters to all the other comic book characters at the time and come before was these characters were bickering a lot.
Yes.
You apparently did not get that with any characters or teams or whatever beforehand.
And that level of tension does bring some intrigue.
Yeah, I mean, what has carried on in the Fantastic Four as a staple of these characters is Ben and Johnny are always at each other's throats. Right. In the kind of family, like brothers or siblings kind of way, but they are always like that. But again, comics at the time, you never had, if characters were on the good side, they didn't argue, they didn't dispute. At worst, I say at best at that time, but worst really, you would have a female companion and the guy would be like, don't worry, like stop your worrying. Like that. Okay. That was the worst. Here you had characters on equal plane, the men at the time, but they are arguing with each other and Johnny's like kicking off. He's like, screw you lot, I'm gonna go and whatever, And
that tension within an ensemble has become a core tenet of what made the Avengers films interesting. And it was the core meditation of one of the Avengers films, the one where they, the one. I
think it's just superhero teams from that time.
Yeah, but there was one where there was a big rift between the Avengers, wasn't there?
Yeah.
The superhero registration stuff.
Oh, the Civil War stuff.
Civil War, we fucking
go. But even just being like just a moment to moment, like, I think we should do this. And I was like, well, no, actually, I think we should do this. Like that as a concept in a comic book was like, what is going on? Like superheroes, like you guys are all meant to be good. Like, why aren't you all on the same page?
So would you argue it's the first time that we see shades of grey? Yeah,
I'd say so. Even just grey in terms of just not even morality. Like we modern day all fiction. We're obsessed with, anti-heroes and the moral grayness or whatever. Here, it's just, you're not bright and chipper or reacting to the stuff that's happening. Like, the fact that they're just arguing between them. The character of the Thing is one of probably the first characters who's sad a lot of the time. For given reasons.
Yeah.
And I think Stanley really, was good at the time for creating, not even just creating characters sad, giving them prime reason to be sad.
Yeah.
And it sounds quaint now for us to be like, imagine, what if a character looked like a monster, but they were actually the protagonist? Like, that's almost the parody of Shrek, basically, isn't it? But again, at the time, all the heroes were all American looking, like
pretty.
Pretty astronauts or soldiers or sailors or whatever. So it was revolutionary at the time for the Thing to be like, he looks like a monster. Not only does he look like a monster, he's aware he looks like a monster, and he's sad about it.
which is the natural response.
Exactly. But then even as opposed to, like, the Hulk existed before this time, like, there are some, I don't know if they're in the Galactus ones, but there are some Hulk references where Thing gets hit by something and he's like, no, kick me harder than the Hulk, like that guy. But even the Hulk, the thing with him was, the Hulk was angry, but Banner was, like, sad that he turned into the Hulk. He wasn't, like, sad to be the Hulk. He was like, it was the separate thing.
They're separate entities.
Yes. The Thing is like, I look like this all the time, and that sucks. And short of what the Comics Code Authority would allow, I probably would be like, suicidal or something at this point. Like, it's interesting that compared to now, where we're like, well, a character's got to be sad. Like, that one makes him interesting. Like, I want my characters to be overly cocky or sad and depressed. Like, I need something to latch onto here.
Preferably both.
Exactly. That's like the bare minimum requirements for a fascinating character these days.
God, it really is, isn't it?
Or the exception that proves the rule, someone like a Ted Lasso, who's almost toxically positive all the time.
Yeah.
And that becomes like it's so far the other way that it's interesting.
Yes.
But Thing here.
And thinking back over the past sort of 15 years, all of the media that has really become popular does have either an aggressively cocky Sherlock type or a wildly intelligent and depressed Tyrion Lannister type.
Yeah.
Walter White. There's not a lot in between, is there?
Yeah, we need him to excel at something and also be morally grey or dubious or whatever. Or
sad.
Or good in a world that's bad. Like, we need some kind of contrast to latch onto. Only recently, the Penguin TV show, which this is a bit of a tangent, but that was one of the first shows where they did this. It seemed like they were doing this anti-hero character. It's like, well, he's bad, but, like, he's in a bad environment. He's product of his environment, and, like, he's not totally bad. The Penguin, and I'm not going to give specific spoilers for the Penguin TV show or anything,
I've not seen
but by the end, you're like, he's evil. Like,
right,
he is fully evil. He's got no one else to blame. Like, he's done all this. He sucks. I want to see more. Like, and that is now our version of, like, doing things differently, because up until very recent, like, every anti-hero character needs some kind of either redemption or like that bit of good in them that we can be like, well, they're not all bad, like, we need something to latch onto while also being interesting.
And so what they've done in the Penguin show is given us an actual cartoon comic book villain again.
Well, yeah, and what's great as well in that show is they try and swerve you or like give you a red herring a little bit. There's these bits and moments where it's like, oh, maybe he's a bit of good in them. Like, maybe he is, like, tough, needs to be as tough as bad to survive in this, but maybe there's something there. And then by the end, you're like, nope, fully evil.
It's quite interesting because Galactus here isn't evil or good. He's just a force of nature. Yeah. So to a certain degree, actually, Stanley really preempted what comic book villains would come to be in later decades with that character.
I think giving them just motivations more interesting than I'm evil, I want to take over the world, or I hate you because I want the money from the bank because I want to be rich. Like, that was, I think, all it was before. And you gotta credit Stan Lee that he at least did write characters with a bit of like something more to them. Like, at the very least, he would do like, oh, they're bad because of this thing that's making them bad, but then you have the juxtaposition of the person in like Green Goblin. Like, he was
Yeah.
made a Green Goblin because of his gas, and he was one of the earliest Spider-Man villains. Gas or serum, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But then you would have that kind of back and forth of like the evil Goblin and the Norman Osborn, who's like, oh, I hate that I turn into this guy, and I don't know, is it me? Is it not me? Like, I think he liked that. I mean, Jekyll and Hyde inspired the Hulk. Like, prime example.
A prime example.
Prime example.
And it's interesting because I was expecting things to be painted in even broader strokes than they are.
Yeah.
I was expecting this. I was expecting I think that's probably the thing that charmed me the most about it, actually, is that I was expecting the characters to be painted in much broader strokes. And generally speaking, Johnny and Reed were. Johnny Reed and what's her face? Reed's wife.
Sue.
Johnny Reed and Sue were painted in quite broad strokes. But The Thing and Galactus...
And Silver Surfer.
Yeah, absolutely. Weren't painted in such broad strokes. And there was a little bit of complexity of character. Not to the extent that we see in really good modern comics. I'm not saying that they were, they had quite the level of complexity and character that you're going to see from like Rick Grimes or somebody. Is it Rick Grimes?
From Walking Dead?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Really complex character.
Yeah. I mean, they all were from The Walking Dead, weren't they?
Yeah, particularly. I mean, Negan probably would have been a better example.
Negan as well. They're all complex.
So yeah, we're not seeing levels of complexity that we'd see in those kind of stories, but of course this isn't that kind of story.
But this was The Walking Dead of its time. It was the Invincible of its time. Like, it was people at the time who was even paying attention to comic books. Probably almost no one.
Yeah.
It was mostly just kids. But then you would have these kids and like early teenagers would grow up and still be into comics or
and
talking
start
about comics.
writing stuff.
And then by the 80s, you were then having this shift into darker tone and mature themes, because you had these people who still loved the medium and grew to love it because one day they were reading kids' comics and they picked up a Fantastic Four and they were like, oh, there's a lot more here than I'm used to. It's not just saving the day. Tell you what, as well, I was going to mention in the big, broad 60s topic that we're ending on.
Yeah.
The other thing that was noticeably different about this in Fantastic Four was there were story arcs that went across issues.
Yes, and that didn't used to happen in Golden Age comics, and I suppose that's something that the Silver Age started to bring in.
Exactly, specifically these comics, these Fantastic Four comics.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that attributable to like these?
I think Fantastic Four and probably Spider-Man at the time. I need to double check it, but I would speculate. I bet money that Spider-Man was probably, because that was written by Stan Lee at this time as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, apparently someone did say Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, they were at this point the first ones who were doing ideas that could not be contained with a single issue.
Yeah.
So like, well, we're going to have to do a 2-parter, and then became a 3-parter, and then like, well, we'll do this arc across 4 issues.
Yeah.
Whereas everyone else at the time was still doing like a villain of the day kind of thing. Like I looked to try and compare this to the first one. I thought, I was like, I wonder how often the Joker was in the Batman.
Yeah.
Like, because if anyone was going to be appearing more times and across multiple issues, even he, before this time, would be in it for an issue. He would have an issue-long story, and then he would go away, and they would come back for another issue-long story. Whereas here, the notable reoccurrence of characters, antagonists, Doctor Doom and Namor the Submariner, they were the characters. They were like, oh, they were doing something this issue, and they're still in this next issue, still doing this scheme or this story.
And doesn't that... I mean, every time you add an extra issue, that every time you elongate an arc over one more issue than you were able to last time, it allows the stories to have orders of magnitude more complexity.
And even on a totally more capitalistic viewpoint, part of the reason they wanted to do single issues...
Sell 3 issues.
Well, the part of the reason everyone else had been doing single issues is, like we always say, kids picking up from a newspaper stand and picks up a random issue whenever. This time, if you catch them with an issue, and it's also why they're doing all the exposition. Someone's kids picking up, they're trying to do these... There was probably less exposition in the single issue comics because they didn't need to do it. Whereas here, they're trying to do this new thing within this early, relatively new medium. So they have to be like, well, a lot of people probably haven't read the issue previously where this story was happening. We need to give them quite a bit of like, oh, shucks, in the last issue, they were trying to do this.
Yes.
And now we're in this predicament.
And so what we're seeing here is a medium bridging the gap between one convention and another.
And the over-exposition at this stage is like teething issues of the expanding medium.
Strictly necessary, yeah.
Rather than the, like we said earlier, the modern one where it's more just laziness and bad writing.
Yeah, and again, it didn't great. I was amazed at the extent to which it didn't grate on me.
And like I say, why I want to keep all this stuff for this part of the episode, the podcast, is all the over-exposition, the art not showing the action as clearly as we're used to, all this stuff was part of like Stanley and Jack Kirby, who are now considered like the greatest to do this kind of stuff. At the time, they were like, should we try this?
Yeah.
Like they were just trial and erroring, and they were seeing what works, and they didn't have people who came before.
Yeah.
Like, whereas the people who read the 60s comics and then grew up and got into the business, either writers or artists or what have you, they could look back on the Fantastic Four stuff and build on that and make like a Spider-Man Kraven's Last Hunt or a Daredevil Born Again, like of the two though, or a Watchman, Al Moore, as we know him as, because
Al.
Yeah, we know Al, but old Ali Moore, this is the stuff that kind of was probably inspiring him to be like, oh, superheroes coming. Because all the talk about, like, a lot of people are like, Alan Moore hates superheroes. That's why he made Watchmen. No, Alan Moore will be the first to tell you. Like, he might feel different about the medium and the, comics as a whole now.
But at the time,
he loved superheroes. Like, that's why he was thinking about all this stuff and going in this direction, pushing the genre even further. It wasn't because he didn't like he wanted to use existing characters.
Yes.
And he was told he couldn't use them. So he had to create new characters just to tell this story.
But he would have it's so obvious that he wanted to play with Batman.
He wanted the Charlton comic. So like he wanted He wanted Blue Beetle. Yeah, the original Blue Beetle.
Yeah.
But even Blue Beetle's like a Blue Beetle, Green Arrow, they are Batman spin-offs essentially.
Yes.
But yeah, he wanted those Charlton characters, not even necessarily because I love the Charlton characters. DC had recently acquired the Charlton characters. So when he heard that, he wanted to I've got this idea for a story and I could use these characters you just acquired.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, because your story's going to potentially set up a nuke or something or turn them into rapists or drug addicts. Like, maybe we don't use those characters for that.
Yes.
And he was like, fine, I'll make my own. And
there'll be hookers and guns.
Yes. Hookers and blackjack. Hookers. And there'll be I can't do it. There'll be hookers and blackjack.
You had to try.
I had to try.
That was a big swing. I didn't necessarily think it was a miss, Ryan.
But what I'm surmising is that
surmise,
as much as we love the gritty stuff, the complex, emotional, intelligent stuff of now, and the gritty homage parody stuff of the 80s, it all came about because of the 60s stuff.
Yeah, and you know what? It was a pleasant reading experience.
I enjoyed it. Like it was like a reading through a comic museum, but one specific artifact that I enveloped myself in for a short time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you go to the Vondel Museum the
Vondel Museum.
No, you go to the Rijksmuseum in Vondel Park in Amsterdam.
Right.
And you see Rembrandt's The Guards, and it's a massive fucking painting and it's really old, and you just stand in front of it for 20 minutes going, fuck. That's what this experience was like for me.
Yeah.
It was just getting to sit with an old chunk of the history. Like, I'm kind of in the comic book world a bit more than I would want to be at this point.
Yeah, you've been dragged there.
Yeah, I do this every week. And it was quite nice to just spend a bit of time going, oh, this is the reason that this became popular, right? Like, this
inspired a generation.
Yeah, totally. And that's kind of cool. And it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Also, Galactus first appeared, he was green and red for some reason.
Yes.
And then the next issue, Kirby was like, that color scheme sucked. I'm just going to change it in the next one.
The original color scheme was a little bit Christmassy.
Yeah. And he was like, I'll change it. No one will notice.
Red and purple, baby.
It's like, Kirby, you inspired a generation. Didn't foresee this. All right. Yep. I think that's it. And we've gone long. That's all we've got. And I'm going to include a pre-recorded call to action afterwards. So why don't you tell the people bye or something.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful night, whatever you're doing.
And thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe to get notified of our future episodes as well. And if you're feeling particularly generous, then please leave a 5-star review on whatever podcast app you're using. If you'd like to get in contact with us, then send an email to comicglitter@gmail.com. You can also watch videos by me on the Comic Stand YouTube page, which is linked in the description. Thank you, goodbye.